Let's take our Bibles and turn to Acts chapter 16. We'll be looking at the incident of the girl possessed with a spirit of divination in Philippi this morning. And so those are going to be verses 16 through 24. The account or the events surrounding her deliverance kind of goes right into our meeting with the Philippian jailer. We'll not get there this week, but this morning we'll be looking at verses 16 through 24, the girl with the spirit of divination. We'll read the passage and then I'll try to explain some of the things that we see happening there and then gather some, or give some thoughts as we finish. And it came to pass, as we went to prayer, a certain damsel possessed with a spirit of divination met us, which brought our masters much gain by soothsaying. The same followed Paul and us and cried, saying, These men are the servants of the Most High God, which show unto us the way of salvation. And this did she many days. But Paul, being grieved, turned and said to the spirit, I command thee in the name of Jesus Christ to come out of her. And he came out the same hour. And when her masters saw that the hope of their gains was gone, they caught Paul and Silas and drew them into the marketplace unto the rulers, and brought them to the magistrates, saying, These men, being Jews, do exceedingly trouble our city, and teach customs which are not lawful for us to receive, neither to observe, being Romans. And the multitude rose up together against them, and the magistrates rent off their clothes, and commanded to beat them. And when they had laid many stripes upon them, they cast them into prison, charging the jailer to keep them safely, who, having received such a charge, thrust them into the inner prison and made their feet fast in the stocks. So here we are in Philippi, and last week we mentioned how there was not a synagogue there, or apparently there wasn't a synagogue there. There was even perhaps not very many Jews there, because Philippi was a Roman colony. And as a colony, it might not have been filled with Romans, but the Roman citizens that had been placed there by the emperor, or when he had pronounced it a colony, had assimilated into it. But the idea that they were a Roman city rather than just still a Greek or Macedonian city in the Roman Empire had come into there. And so they were probably, they probably observed the laws of the Roman Senate, rather, which would be different than normal cities there. And we know near this time, we don't exactly know the timing of it, but we know near this time that Emperor Claudius had determined that no Jews would be allowed in Rome. That's why, not long after this, when Paul comes to Corinth, he meets Aquila and Priscilla, who were Jews, who were there, lately come there because of the edict of Claudius, who had expelled them from Rome, expelled all the Jews from Rome. It just seems plausible that a Roman colony, since they would typically follow the laws of the city of Rome, would also have expelled or not allowed Roman Jewish people to be there. And as it turns out, Paul and Silas and the others, we don't meet up with any Jews there. Last week there was people who feared God. They had a place of prayer out by the riverside outside the city, and as they went there, they met some women, and one of them was Lydia, who was a seller of purple, and she believed. God opened her heart, and she believed the things that Paul had said and was converted. And here it says, and it came to pass as we went to prayer. So apparently they continued, even though that Lydia had, constrained them to stay in her home, they still met they still would go to the place of prayer outside the city by the river. And and it came to pass, as we went to prayer, a certain damsel possessed with a spirit of divination met us, and she brought her masters much gain by soothsaying. So this girl is introduced to us as a damsel possessed with a spirit of divination. Now, the spirit of divination was, and I haven't got all into the Greek mythology or anything like this, but there was a Pythias or something like this. There was Python was a god that was defeated by Apollo, and there were temples to Apollo, several of them, and at these temples, a very large one at Delphi, and at these temples, the priestesses or the girls at the temple, you could go there and find out things. If somebody had stolen something from your house, you could go there, and these priests, these girls would tell you where it was, or if you wanted to know something about the future. Of course, you had to pay money to find this out, so it would be very similar to what we see today around us, psychics or tarot card readers or something like that. But anyway, you could go to the temple and find something out, or in this case, there's not a temple to Apollo in Philippi, but she had the spirit of Pythias, or this Pythian spirit, this spirit of the same, was named this way, as somebody that could foretell things, soothsay. Now, as I was reading and studying about this, I think I'm correct here, but it has been about 10 years, so I might not be remembering correctly. But when we first went on a tour of ancient lands, we took a tour of Ephesus, Didyma, and Miletus, they call it. Do you remember that, Sam? Did you go with us? Were we in Didyma together? There was a big, no? I thought you came with us there. But anyway, we were at this temple, and this guy was telling us, here's what people would do. You would put your question on a piece of paper, and somebody would take it down into the temple, and inside the temple were these women that would just drink. They were drunk, and as they would babble something, they would write the answer on it, and as it came out, you'd get this answer, and the person that had sent the piece of paper in there would get a piece of paper out with an answer, and really it was just the words of a drunk woman. That was the story, and it could be that that's the truth in some cases, but that's not the story in this case. To tell you something else, a lot of these people who were soothsayers were actually ventriloquists. You would come to them and ask them a question, and they would speak to you, but really you didn't know they were speaking to you. You thought some voice from outside, from either you'd hear words from another part of their body, like coming out of their hand or something like that, or you'd hear a voice from a different part of the room, and obviously that would be the spirit, the spirit giving you the answer to your question. So they could be somewhat just shysters or false about things. Some people, and this is well known in history that people did this, some people looked at this incident and women that would do this were called by this same name. Some people have looked at this incident and say, well, she was just a ventriloquist. There's a problem with that, though. When Paul cast the demon out of her, if it was just ventriloquism, why couldn't she do it anymore after the incident when Paul rebuked the spirit? So while there were people that foretold the future that really were just very whatever you want to say, active minds and use the trickery of ventriloquism to make money. This girl was not one of those. Maybe she did it at some times. Maybe sometimes they were demon-possessed, and sometimes when they weren't demon-possessed, they did this because they still had to perform. They still had to make them. If somebody came to them and wanted an answer, and you didn't get an answer, no money. So it was kind of maybe a backup plan or something. I don't know exactly. But the point is that some people say that this woman was just a ventriloquist, and that is clearly not true. She had a spirit of divination, and she comes along, and normally she would be set up somewhere. She has masters, so several people are making money off of her business. People come to her to find out where they left something, who took something, what's going to happen to them, and then pay money for the answer. Well, it doesn't say this, but it seems that perhaps she heard what Paul and Silas and Luke and Timothy were doing, and maybe on her free time goes and listens to this, and she realizes that there's something special here. We don't know all the motives for this, but she does. She's not set up in her booth. It's not like he's walking along, there's her booth, and she yells out there. She sees them, she follows them, and I've lost my place here. Yeah, she cries out saying, "These men are the servants of the Most High God, which show unto us the way of salvation." Absolute truth. She says, these men, talking of Timothy and Luke and Paul and Silas, these men are the servants of the Most High God. The Most High God is a phrase that the Jews used for a long time to distinguish God from among the other gods. Now, pagan people use that term, and it wasn't necessarily to refer to the true God, but it was a God above all the pantheon of gods that they had. And what she said about them was true, is that they could show them the way of salvation, and that's the truth. Now, pagans also were aware that they needed salvation, but she comes and she announces this. You might think, when you first hear that, you think, wow, somebody knows what we're doing. Somebody's listened to this and is saying the truth. Another day goes by, or on the way back, or whatever, she says it again. Pretty soon Paul's thinking, there's something wrong with this situation. Figures out who she is. Maybe he knows all along, but figures out who she is and is grieved by it. So she follows Paul and cries this, "These men are the servants of the Most High God, which show unto us the way of salvation." And she did it many days. Paul is grieved and turned and said to the Spirit, "I command thee in the name of Jesus Christ to come out of her." Jesus had said that his apostles and followers would cast out spirits in his name, and he came out the same hour. Well, this is a truly demon-possessed girl, and it's a true deliverance, because when her masters saw that the hope of their gains was gone, they caught Paul and Silas. So they had been making a lot of money off of her, and now no more. And to me, by this statement, she doesn't even use ventriloquism as a backup, because she could always fall back on that. Or maybe she's absolutely delivered and she's saved and doesn't want anything to do with it. She's been saved. She has found the way of salvation, and she doesn't want anything to do with those former masters, but she would be their slave. But they saw that the hope of their gains was gone. The was gone and cast and came out is the same idea. It's almost like Paul cast all their opportunities for making money out. That was cast out. It was gone. It came out of her the same moment that she lost her abilities, they lost any hope of making any more money. And so that loss of money makes them very angry, of course. Money speaks. It does things, doesn't it? So all this, they lose their chance to make money, and so they catch Paul and Silas. Now it seems evident that, or seems probably they caught Paul and Silas for a couple reasons. Probably they spoke more than Luke and Timothy. We don't know that for sure. We do know that Timothy had a Greek father and Luke was a Greek, and so, but Paul and Silas were Jewish. And what did they say when they brought them? They didn't say, when they brought Paul and Silas before the magistrate, they said nothing about losing their money or anything like that. They said these guys are Jews. So they caught Paul and Silas, drew them into the marketplace under the rulers. So the marketplace is the agora. It's the place where everything took place. In this, selling all and whatever. And in this city, being a Roman colony, it would be very much like the forum. And so in this forum, marketplace, the rulers of the people, the magistrates of the city, would also be there. And so they dragged them in there before the rulers and brought them under the magistrate, saying, these men being Jews. First thing about them is that they're Jews. This is significant because here's a city, a Roman city, who's already expelled Jews, probably, out of their coast, out of their area. And so here these Jews are coming in. It's very, just the idea that they're Jews is very much a part of the argument against them, which is obviously a discriminatory or racial or whatever you want to call it. Just the fact that they're Jews doesn't mean anything. But to them it did. And so them being Jews, they do exceedingly trouble our city. Now they had done nothing of the sort. All they had done is trouble their pocketbook. Exceedingly trouble our city. And teach customs which are not lawful for us to receive, neither to observe, being Romans. Now they had done that. Rome especially would allow people to believe whatever they wanted, but you couldn't tell anybody else, you couldn't try to get other people to believe what you believed. As soon as you started trying to get people to believe what you believe, then you're trying to change their beliefs, you're teaching customs, and Rome would not allow for that. That was not something that was against their laws, and since they were Romans, they brought that up. So they're really just using popular sentiment to build up antagonism against Paul and Silas. And it worked in the multitude. So not just the magistrates, the rulers, but the multitude that came there to listen to this rose up together against them, and the magistrates rent off their clothes and commanded to beat them. It seems that the rending of the clothes is not in the Jewish fashion where the high priest rent his own clothes as a sign of distress or something terrible happened. It seems here that the magistrates rent the clothes of Paul and Silas off of them. This is a known custom in those areas, contrary to what it would be like in Jewish areas. So they pulled their clothes off of them and beat them and had them beaten. That is what would happen in lots of situations, and probably also in this situation. So they pulled their clothes off of them and commanded them to be beaten. And in the word is a lictor, the Roman lictors, I think that's the way you say it, they would beat them with rods. And if I'm understanding correctly, they would have some type of a stick that they could hang on to, and on the end of it were several sticks, rods. So this is like something like like an axe handle with a lot of rods on the end, and they would use that several rods to beat on the person. So when Paul says, thrice I was beaten with rods, this would be one of those times. When he gives that list, he says 5 times received I whatever 40 stripes save 1. That would be of the Jews, where the Jews had a restriction on how many stripes they could lay on somebody. The Romans, they didn't have those restrictions, so he probably received way more, plenty more than 39 stripes. He just says, thrice I was beaten with rods. This is one of those times. When he speaks to the Thessalonians, which is the town he went to right after this, he says, you know how I had suffered shamefully, and that would be in the stripping of the clothes and being beaten beyond what would be normal. You remember in Deuteronomy, God says, when he gives the Jews the restriction on how many stripes, he says, you only give them 40 stripes because otherwise you're like this, I can't remember the words, but you're despising the person as a person and not just giving him the punishment for his due. But the Romans didn't have that restriction. So here's one of those times he was beaten with rods. So they're beaten, and they'd laid many stripes on them. They cast them into prison, charging the jailer to keep them safely. So the jailer gets the feel from all of this. He maybe hears all the stuff going on. They're brought there, and they said, you keep these people and make sure that they're kept. Keep them safely. I mean, where's Dave? You put them in prison, they're safe, right? Keep them, but he says, the Bible even says, who having received what? Such a charge. I mean, you can't hardly blame him for putting them in the inner prison. We might say, oh, he's just rough, and he just threw them in the inner prison, and he didn't care about them, I will say. But he is threatened. He's clearly threatened that these guys had better not get out. He's keep them safely, and having received such a charge, puts them in the inner prison and made their feet fast in the stocks. So a prison had generally 3 areas. They had it was all locked up. They had an outside area, and then an inner area. And then inside the inner area was like a dungeon that never saw the light of day and was very nasty to be in. And so he puts them, they're locked thrice in the inner prison, and then he puts them in stocks. It could be the stocks that we think of, but most likely it was just a big board placed between their feet. So a board placed between their legs were strapped to this board, and it was a board long enough to be very uncomfortable even just sitting. And obviously, just imagine something like this, and you're obviously, if you could get up, you wouldn't really be able to walk very far or very fast or anything if your feet are in stocks. So they're beaten, they're bloody, their feet are in stocks, and they're locked up in the inner prison. And then just a tremendous turn of events that we'll see next week. They're singing, and there's an earthquake. But let's just think of a couple things through this event. First, think of the girl. We should distinguish, and her message. Remember, she said, these are the servants of the Most High God who have shown us the way of salvation. We can learn from this to distinguish between those that promote or those that proclaim the gospel and the truth of the gospel itself. Okay? So today, in all times, people that proclaim the gospel, we're all human beings, and we have failings, and somebody that is opposed to the gospel may point out the failings of somebody that preaches the gospel and say, so it must not be true, it's not something to be listened to because look, so-and-so, he preaches the gospel. Paul's opinion of that, when he talked about those that preached out of contempt and wanted to hurt him, he didn't care. He says, if the gospel is preached, that's fine. But we shouldn't allow a person's character or even just a person's mannerisms or anything like that to cloud our thinking about the truth of what is being said. Doesn't matter who says it. If it's true, it's true. And so we should understand that, and we should respond to that truth. Another thing that we should notice is that talking about the gospel and believing the gospel are two different things. Here was a person who was proclaiming the truth. She was proclaiming the truth. You know, if she could be like any of us here. Amen. Who knows? But if we let our imagines go just a little bit, you could imagine she not only followed them, how did she even know what they were saying? Maybe the Spirit told her, but she could have come to their meetings. She could have been sitting there saying, amen, or whatever the words were there. You folks better, we ought to listen to these people. They're the prophets of the Most High God. They're telling us the way of salvation. She could have been, you know, and so, but all the while, she herself is a servant of the devil and is under the power of the devil. Now, I'm not going to claim that anybody here or part of our church is demon-possessed, but just because you can say the right words doesn't mean you know the truth and have believed the truth in your own heart. And here's a very strong example of that. She's saying the absolute truth about the situation, but she is not a believer. So, believing the gospel is very different from talking about the gospel. And then finally, and I think this would be a little more obvious from the passage, notice how Satan attacks. I'm not saying it's always this order, but in this passage, first, he's very friendly. You know, it appears that if Paul had never cast the demon out of her, he would have continued to just compliment them and all of this. I guess maybe the thing to think about is just because, you know, beware of who you're being complimented by. Just because things are going good doesn't mean that it's the best in the world. It could be the devil. The devil came along and said, these people are telling you the truth. After a while, you find out, oh, it's the devil saying that, and it's not really very helpful. First of all, he's friendly. Then things turn, and he's very antagonistic. He's very hostile. Grabs him, and some of the first. No, I shouldn't say that. Can't say it's the first persecution. I'll just do it a quick thing. He's already been stoned and left for dead. So it's not his first persecution. But very strong persecution here again in Philippi. Beaten and maligned, lied about, you know, accused of things that were not even part of the issue. And Satan is that way too. So we can notice here in this passage Satan's attacks. His attacks could be friendly, or could seem friendly, and then they can be hostile. Either way, we should just. In a certain sense, I'm not saying that we should be. We shouldn't let our awareness that we're in a battle cause us to be hesitant or scared to do anything. I imagine if we're in a physical battle, you know, being scared that the enemy is at every step. But at the same time, if we're in a physical battle, we know that we have an enemy and they can attack at any time. And in our spiritual lives, we shouldn't be paralyzed because we have an enemy. Our enemy is defeated already. Okay. But we do have an enemy, and he can attack, and he can and does attack in different ways. And we should be aware of those things. When things seem to be going well, that's not always good for us. Even our own flesh can just let things go and not do what we ought to. It doesn't even have to be the devil when things are going well for us to to get sidetracked and not do what we ought to for the Lord. So, Paul takes care of or delivers this girl and faces persecution because of it, and we can learn some things from that situation. Let's pray.